Good afternoon, and welcome back to another edition of Americans for Prosperity's Congressional Conversations. My name is Greg Dowell, and today we are joined with Tennessee's 5th Congressional District Congressman Andy Ogles. Congressman Ogles, thank you so much for being with us today. Feel free to tell us about how your day's going and how the first couple of months of Congress have been for you.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for being here and allowing me this opportunity to speak with you guys. It's been crazy, drinking from a fire hose. I'm on the Financial Services Committee, so we start out with the fight over the rules package and the speaker election, which a lot of people misunderstood what was going on there, that it was about one individual, when in reality, it was about the rules that govern the House of Representatives. And what's happened over time is that the authority of Congress has been shifted to a handful of members. And what we were fighting for was restoring that to every member. So as a freshman, as a new member, could actually offer an amendment. Imagine that I could have something that might cut spending, which is just like AFP, low taxes, less government kind of person. And so that's what that fight was about, was restoring the rules like our founding fathers intended. But then we've had the debt ceiling issue, you've had the banking crisis, and so it's been a crazy busy couple of months. I know we'll get into that further, but it's drinking from a fire hose. I'm surrounded by a great team. So my office is it's actually the most prolific freshman office. We've passed more amendments, and I have co-sponsored more pieces of legislation and authored more letters to agencies asking for accountability. So credit to my legislative team. Like over Memorial Day, when we were working on the debt ceiling bill, we had 9 amendments. We worked over the weekend, and I had the most amendments offered on that legislation because it needed to be fixed.
Well, congratulations. That's a robust resume from just a few short months.
Yeah, it's been crazy, but again, credit to the team. I mean, they're passionate, they love what they do, they're here for the right reasons. They want to fix, save, and change America to what our founding fathers intended.
That is wonderful to hear, and I appreciate the time today, knowing how busy you are.
No, it's great.
We talked about the 2023 legislative agenda from Americans for Prosperity, Pathway to Prosperity. And I just wanted to give you a second to, after you've reviewed it, and tell us a little bit more about what you're most excited to partner with AFP in developing or supporting in this congressional session.
Yeah, so one of the things that when I think about Americans for Prosperity, it's about low taxes, less government, removing barriers to entry to the workplace and to entrepreneurship so everybody can achieve the American dream. And so one of the things that we have is when you think back to Trump's presidency, you have the tax cuts that will be expiring in a few years. Then you have the tax cut for small businesses, which is expiring. And so you have the TCJA, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which will make the tax savings for individuals and families permanent, and it restores the 20% savings for small businesses. And what that does, that means every American gets to keep more of their hard-earned dollars that they can then put back into the economy. Because so the more money that we can keep at home and out of DC, the better off we are as a whole, as a country, as individuals, as families. Which is, we can talk about the debt ceiling fight later, but that's why it's so important that we have less government, that we have less spending, and we get government, quite frankly, out of our lives and out of the day-to-day governance of our lives.
And that freedom and that empowerment is something that we care about deeply at AFP. And you know this, and I maybe should have led with this a little bit sooner, but you know this from a personal level because you're a former state director for Americans for Prosperity. And I just would love to hear a little bit about your time as state director and talk about what you've seen AFP accomplish, both in Tennessee, but as the nation as a whole.
Yeah, so when I joined AFP, it was really during a heavy growth phase. So I started the Tennessee chapter. We had huge legislative victories in Tennessee with the Hall tax cut. We fought and blocked Obamacare in the state of Tennessee, which laid the groundwork for Florida blocking Obamacare expansion and was really hailed as a huge victory for blocking the further expansion of Obamacare. But because we were during that growth phase, and I had the blessing to be in that work for AFP at the time, I also got to help and assist and mentor many other states. And so you saw those same victories in Wisconsin and Michigan and Louisiana as AFP continued to expand their footprint and fight for every working class, hardworking American that's truly trying just to achieve the American dream. And so boots on the ground matter. And so being engaged with an organization like an AFP, where you're pushing conservative values, where you're engaging your members of Congress or at the state level, your House of Representatives or your state House or your state Senate, it matters. It makes a difference because we actually want to hear from you. We really want to know what you're thinking and how this is going to impact you. So anytime I have a constituent that's from industry, and I'll ask specifically, like, so I'm in the Financial Services Committee, which is banking and the stock market and interest rates, anything economy, anything money. I'll ask the bankers, or I'll ask that business person, how is what we're doing or that Congress has done negatively impacting your business, so that I can take that specific information and try to fix it, right? And so by communicating with your legislators at the state and the federal level, we know what's broken, and we know then we have a mission to go fix it.
Yes, and you bring up a really good point that I always appreciate about Americans for Prosperity, and one of the reasons I sought so much an opportunity to work here is the cross-section between action and knowledge. We don't just do things haphazardly, and we don't just talk about things. We've found a way to marry those two ideas together and make sure that good action is being supported by good ideas.
That's right.
And you brought up your economic background, and I want to lean into that. We've already talked a little bit about the debt limit and the current fight that's going on. With your seat on financial services, with your background in economics, could you talk a little bit more about what you're seeing for the financial industry, for the debt limit, and how that's going to affect the everyday American?
Yeah, so there's really two things to discuss here. During the same time period that you have this fight or over the legislation on raising the debt ceiling, that was just before that you had the banking crisis, where you had some of the larger banks fail in California and New York. And it should be noted that the banking system as a whole is sound. What you had was 3 banks that were poorly managed. Their deposit structures, and I won't go into the nerdiness of that, they were mismanaged, and they created liabilities and exposures to the markets. So when interest rates changed, these banks were now short on cash that they could readily give to you, the customer, if you wanted your money back, which they're required to be able to have on hand. And so then what happened, that forced them to have to be consolidated or taken over by larger banks. So with that, then you get into the debt ceiling that was set to, the X date was set as June 1st. That's a little bit of political fiction, quite frankly. I think the reality is we probably could have stretched that to August, but neither here nor there. We set a deadline, and the deal that's being presented to the Senate and then ultimately will be voted on, or was voted on, is it's a date certain, not dollar certain. That always concerns me with Congress, in that when you look at the Limit, Save, Grow Act that we originally proposed, the budget cuts were up front. So when we said you're going to save $900 billion, we got that money on the front end. The problem that I see with this package is that some of the savings that are in there, I don't think will really be realized because they're target spending numbers. The pay-go provision, which is a pay-as-you-go provision for the executive branch, that can be waived. And so again, the money there. So I am concerned. So anytime government promises to save you money in the future, I would like that payment up front. I don't always trust DC math, if you will. And so I voted against it. And the reason is I think that the American taxpayers deserve those savings on the front end, not the back end. And unfortunately, I think instead of being a roughly $4 trillion increase in the debt limit, because it's not dollar certain, I think it'll be closer to $5 trillion, because the savings in there are not guaranteed. And again, which is why I was so fervently against it.
Understood. And as we've talked about, this is a fight. This is a conversation that is going to have to continue.
That's right.
And we're going to have to do it for the American people because, as you said before, the more money we can be keeping in the pockets of hardworking Americans is empowering them to live their best selves, to have the freedom to live their life as they need to, as they want to. And that's what the American dream is.
Yeah, and I will say there was one of the provisions in the bill that was a good victory for conservatives and quite frankly for energy policy was some of the regulatory reforms on the permitting process. So there's a case in Georgia where the airport was trying to add a runway, and it was about a 9-year project, give or take. Only 2 years of that was construction. The other 7, 8 years, whatever it was all the environmental battle that went in behind it. That's now been narrowed so that when you have a project like that, it can be done in a realistic time so that you can be on budget because costs go up over a decade, that you can address needs in a more near-term fashion. So whether it's a pipeline expansion or infrastructure expansion, those are important, and it removes some of the regulatory baloney that gets in the way of infrastructure. And look, the future to getting inflation down, interest rates back down, is going to be tied to energy independence. And we can't be relying on our enemies for natural resources, and we have an abundance of oil and gas. And so I'll stop there, but that was one of the provisions that was a victory. I think we could have gotten more, but we'll see. The next fight will be soon.
To be continued.
That's
to
right.
be continued. Now, I do want to change gears a little bit because we're having a conversation beforehand, and I want you to have an opportunity to tell us a little bit more about it. So the question I'll ask is, what's something about you that would surprise someone if they learned it?
Yeah. Well, so I'm a beekeeper, and I actually got stung this weekend. So this is swarm season, and so I put up a number of swarm traps across our farm, and I caught 3. One I had already successfully moved without incident. I moved the second one, or 2 in one day, and I was able to open it up and move them gently. I was able to cut the comb out and very gingerly move them. So they were a little irritated with me, but they weren't angry at me. Now the last one I moved, the comb was much heavier. So when I opened the trap, the comb broke and fell into the box. Well, apparently one of those had the queen on it, and those things were all over me. And of course, I'm wearing a bee suit, but there's a weak spot here in your wrist where as you're lifting and you're moving things around, your jacket will slide up. Now you have on gloves that come to your elbow, but man, they wore me out on my wrist. And I don't know if they can sense it, but man, the last time I got stung was in the same place. And so the last 2 days, my hand has been swollen. So I've been taking Benadryl and steroids to keep it from swelling into my forearm. But that's the price of getting organic, homegrown honey that we consume for ourselves. We don't sell it; we just give it away to our friends as gifts. But the price you pay when you're a beekeeper.
I mean, I have to say, I've had some good homegrown honey before, and it's very worth it. There's a little pain with it, it sounds like, but it's worth it.
Legit.
So taking us back to home, you're from Murray County, Tennessee, southwest of Nashville, about an hour or so is what I like to say usually. And they have a tradition known as Mule Day.
That's right.
And I'm sure our Tennessee viewers are familiar with it, but I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about the Mule Day celebration and its history for those of us who may not be as familiar as us Tennesseans.
Yeah, so if you ever travel south to Columbia, we have a beautiful courthouse right there on the square. I would argue it's one of the top 3 courthouses in the state, and I'll put ours as number 1, but I'm biased. I was county executive, and my office was in that building. But when you go back to World War I, Tennessee, in particular Columbia, was the mule capital of the world. And so mules were used readily during the war to transport goods, weapons, cargo. And you would have these huge auctions in downtown Columbia on the square where you would just have thousands of mules and thousands of people. And it became a huge annual event that created a lot of commerce and industry. And so over the years, it's been honored with parades. And there's been a few years during like World War II when it was paused, briefly paused during COVID. But going back decades, we've had a Mule Day parade and a festival all around kind of honoring our history. At one point, Columbia, Culleoka in particular, was also the cantaloupe capital of the United States, but that breed has since gone out of favor because it's not as shelf stable on the supermarket shelf.
Okay.
Yeah. So another little tidbit of back home.
The more you know, the more
right.
you know. Now, we've been talking about food, and in congressional conversations, we like to have a little fun. We like to always end with a little fun. And it's summertime, so it's time for us to start grilling. And I have to ask, is it a hamburger? Is it a hot dog? Is it a chicken breast? What are we putting on the grill if you're at home cooking?
Well, to be full disclosure, we were carnivores in our house, so all of the above. But like for Memorial Day, we put all sorts of. We had friends over. We had all sorts of chicken on the grill. I grilled them with seasoning. I put a barbecue glaze on them. But then we also did brats and hot dogs as well for the kids, so they could choose. And I like my secret when I cook meat is I like to cook slow, low and slow, and then I'll continually drizzle the meat with beer to keep it moist, so I'm not drying out the skin. So it gives it a nice, rich flavor. Now it takes more time, and you stand over the grill for a much longer period of time. But no, I love to cook, I love to grill, and then my wife makes me clean up the dishes. So yes, I'm a congressman, but when I go home, I have no authority because my wife makes me clean up afterwards. So that's the reality of being a congressman. I go home to farm chores, honey-do list, and doing the dishes.
Well, and then you got to avoid the regular bee attack.
Right. But it's fun. I mean, I grew up in the suburb, but my grandparents had a farm. And some of my fondest memories were of, I was an Eagle Scout, so camping and hiking and fishing and being on my grandparents' farm. And so if you were to go through my top 10 fond memories of a kid, it goes back to those two things. And so about 8.5 years ago, we moved out of Franklin, which I love, and moved south of Columbia to bought a little farm because we wanted our kids. So we have a sheep, and we have chickens, and we have guineas. We're about to add cows. We have bees. And there's only one way to have those experiences, and that's to do it. And so there's some weekends that I go home and the entire family, we're out there putting up new fencing, or one of our sheep, the male, our ram, got sick, and he's a mean, ornery old soul, but we gave him antibiotics, although there was a part of me that just wanted to harvest him. But, but that's part of farm life. And, our kids, it teaches them responsibility and hard work. And, they have to get up in the morning before school and do their chores. But, at the same token, when they come home from school, they're independent and they do their homework. And I think we've got to get back to that in America of accountability, that entrepreneurship that once was so inherent in our, that greatest generation, if you will. And part of that is to get government out of our lives so that we're less dependent on government and so that you are the captain of your own destiny.
And what a great word to end on. And Congressman, thank you so much. It has been just an absolute pleasure to hear from you, learn a little bit more about you, your district, and your goals for Congress. We're very glad to have you here and to partner with you, and we look forward to the big things of your future.
Absolutely. Again, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take care.